Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Today is December 16th, and we're lucky to have our Dharma teacher, Jay Earley, psychologist, coach, group leader, psychosocial theorist, and author of 3 books. He is interested in the integral theory of Ken Wilber and is a longtime student of the Diamond Approach. And he'll be talking to us today at the Sangha around the Diamond Approach.
So the Diamond Approach has been around for about 25 or 30 years. It's also sometimes known as Diamond Heart, and the spiritual school that exists to promote the Diamond Approach is called the Ridwan School. So you may have heard it under various names. It was started by Hameed Ali, who, another name, writes under the pen name of A.H. Almaas. So if you've seen any of his books, it'll be under the name of Almaas, but his name is actually Hameed Ali. And his sense is that this path kind of has come through him over the last 25 or 30 years. And as a result, he started the school, and there are probably 30 or 40 teachers in the school in the Bay Area, and there are groups all around the country, and it's very big in Europe and Australia and so on. So I'm going to give you just a kind of rough overview about the approach, and feel free to interrupt me or ask questions or make comments. I feel like that'll make it a more interesting presentation, so please do that. And if there's time left at the end, I may do a little exercise with you, but I'm not sure. We'll see how the time goes. One of the most characteristic things about the Diamond Approach is that it incorporates a lot of psychology and psychotherapy into the approach. In fact, it's, as far as I know, the finest integration of psychology and spirituality around. Although it's not something that was like, Hameed didn't say, oh, well, here's a spiritual thing and here's psychology, see if I can integrate them. The Diamond Approach came out of his own spiritual explorations and his own path toward realization, and it seems to sort of find the place where psychology and spirituality are naturally integrated rather than trying to put two things together. So the first thing I want to talk about are what are called aspects of essence. It's considered in the Diamond Approach that the essence of who we are is spiritual, and that our essence is something that manifests in us and through us from moment to moment. And one of the ways that it manifests is in various aspects of essence, which you can think of as, well, psychologically, you can think of them as sort of healthy psychological capacities. Let me actually give examples. Compassion, spaciousness, joy, peace, love, strength. These are all aspects of essence. And the idea is that when you are in touch with your spiritual essence, then whatever aspect of essence is needed in any given situation will just naturally manifest in you, both in your own experience and also in the way you act and relate to people. So we can look at compassion as an example. Compassion is fairly similar to to metta in Buddhism. It's a little bit different in that compassion is understood to be a response to pain. You could think of compassion as being a loving response to pain, to your own pain or to someone else's pain. And so the understanding is that when there is pain, that a natural response of one's essence to pain is compassion. And that's experienced as a kind of gentle, loving response. And it also manifests in various actions or ways of speaking that would manifest compassion. Another aspect of essence is space, or spaciousness, which is probably also pretty well known to Buddhists. Space is essentially an experience of sort of pure openness, of a kind of underlying emptiness that can be there. One of the things I should say is that the way that the diamond in the diamond work, you frequently a lot of it proceeds, at least starts from body awareness, so that if you are frequently, if you're experiencing one of these aspects of essence, you will be noticing where you're experiencing it in your body. So you might feel compassion in your heart. You might notice space in your head, for example, or in some other part of your body. So joy is another aspect of essence. It's a kind of a lightness, happiness, a kind of sort of a loving, light, airy presence. And peace, I won't go through all of them. There are many different aspects of essence. Peace is another one. Strength is another aspect of essence. Strength is what people are often trying to achieve or trying to manifest when they get angry. Anger is obviously not an aspect of essence, but strength is. Strength is a kind of sense of personal power and solidness and ability to act and stand up and take care of oneself. So that's another aspect of essence. And one of the most interesting things about the diamond approach is that there's an understanding that each of the aspects of essence can be blocked by various psychological issues or difficulties. So, for example, compassion can be blocked by feeling judgmental, obviously. If you're feeling judgmental towards yourself or towards someone else, it's going to be hard to feel compassion. Joy might be blocked by a feeling of heaviness or depression. Peace would be blocked by a sense of agitation and hurry and so on. So there's, and it's not just one thing. I mean, any given psychological or issue can block various aspects of essence. But there's a whole understanding that's developed in the diamond work about that. So that one of the main parts of the diamond approach is to explore, well, let me see, I'll get into that in a minute. But basically the understanding is that by working through these various psychological issues, then that opens you to the different aspects of essence. Both in the moment, if you're doing some process, that it may open you to joy or to peace or to compassion, but also by working through that psychological issue in a more fundamental way in your life, it helps you to integrate that aspect of essence in your life so that it will naturally emerge in those situations where it's called for, where it's needed, where it just naturally is something that needs to flow from you instead of being blocked by the psychological issue. So, any questions or comments so far? Okay. So, let me talk about the diamond approach includes a number of different practices, including meditation, but the primary practice, the fundamental practice of the approach is called inquiry. And it's a rather complex practice, so I'm going to take some time to describe a little about it and how it works. Basically, inquiry is similar in some ways to mindfulness meditation, in the sense that you basically pay attention to your moment-to-moment experience. And it starts, you start, especially when you're first learning it, you start with body awareness. So you're aware of sensations in your body. But and of course, but it's not limited to body awareness. So you will also be aware of emotions or thoughts or fantasies, or where is your attention going. And you also, of course, be aware of essential states, these aspects of essence that I've been talking about, if those arise in your experience. But the thing that's different from mindfulness meditation is that in inquiry, when you become aware of whatever you're experiencing, you don't just notice it and then let it go. You actually explore it. So the inquiry involves exploring whatever's going on in your current experience. Now let's see. So this is hard to explain. The exploration that I'm talking about is simultaneously a sort of experiential, in the moment, what am I actually experiencing, and it's an attempt to understand that experience. So, but understanding doesn't just mean intellectual understanding. It means a whole body, whole person understanding. So understanding includes emotional, spiritual, body, and intellectual understanding. I'm trying to think how much I better give an example. So let's suppose that you sit down and you start doing inquiry, and you notice that you're feeling kind of agitated and hurried and busy, and you may notice that by a sense of kind of a flutteriness or a tingliness in your chest, or some sort of tension in your arms. Let's say that as an example. So you notice that, and as part of the inquiry, you ask yourself, well, what is that? You get curious about what is that experience of hurriedness and tension. And let's suppose in this particular example, by being with that for a while, that experience with that question, you realize that the agitation is actually your way of trying not to feel sad. You realize that there's an underlying sadness, and you've been running around because you didn't want to feel it. So when you realize that, of course, what happens is you start feeling the sadness. Not because you try to feel sad, but because that's simply when you really understand a defense, it dissolves. And so you become whatever was underneath it in your experience just naturally emerges, and so you feel the sadness. But then, of course, you ask yourself, well, what is the sadness? And so you start being curious about that. And you don't do this by sort of going into your head and saying, well, let's see if I can figure out what I'm sad about. It's more by going in, being really present with the sadness, feeling it, and noticing where you, let's say you notice that you feel it in your heart. And in the diamond approach, what we learn to do is not only to notice where we're feeling something in our body, but to actually notice at least you start out with the actual physical experience of the sadness. So you might notice that there's a kind of heaviness in your heart, or you might notice that there's a sense of a sharp pain of some kind, or a sense of emptiness, maybe that feels sad is somehow in your heart. And you might ask yourself, what's the quality of the sadness? And you might say, well, you might realize, the sadness feels kind of like a hurt. So this would all might be what you might be exploring in understanding the sadness. And then maybe, let's say, I'm just making up an example, let's say you realize, I feel hurt, and it's because I feel rejected by someone that I'm interested in, someone I'm attracted to. That this maybe have happened a day before or something, and I'm still feeling hurt about that. And so then you would say, okay, you get curious about that. Well, what does that hurt? And you would start looking into that. And you would also, again, you would look into it by actually feeling the hurt and feeling the quality of the hurt in your heart. And of course, in the process of this, your experience might involve other things as well. I'm just sort of following one track that you might do in your exploring. Now, I'm going to follow this example in a moment, but let me introduce another concept that's important in the diamond approach, which is the concept of object relations. This is actually taken from a form of psychoanalysis where they understand how we relate to other people through the concept of object relations. An object relation is basically a psychological structure in your psyche that kind of unconsciously usually tells you how to relate to other people. So an example of an object relation consists of an image of the self, or a representation of the self, or representation of another person, and some feeling sense. And so an example of an object relation would be, I am small and needy, and the other is attractive and interesting and has all the goodness, and I want them, and they're not available to me, or they don't want me, they reject me. So that's an object relation that many of us carry around in us in some form. There's hundreds of different object relations. This is just an example of one. And an object relationship like that can be triggered. So if somebody that you're interested in rejects you, it can trigger this object relation and sort of plunge you into a whole set of feelings that come from that psychological structure, which probably originated somewhere in your childhood. So to get back to the example, so you're exploring your experience and you're feeling the hurt, and in looking at that hurt, you realize that particular object relation I just gave you an example of is up. You can sense that in yourself. You can sense that you are feeling small, needy. Oh, the other part of this particular object relation is that you feel is unlovable. I didn't mention it, but that's an important part of this particular object relation. You feel unlovable. There's something wrong with you. It's not just that this person wasn't interested in you. You're unlovable. That's part of the object relation. So, and that's really where the hurt comes from, ultimately. So, in exploring yourself, you might realize that. You might realize that there's a sense of that object relation and that you're actually feeling unlovable. And that's where a lot of the pain is. And again, this is not just an intellectual exploration. This is something that only is useful if you actually feel it. Now, this leads to another important part of the diamond approach, which is called the theory of wholes. Holes. And the idea here in the theory of wholes is that, as I mentioned before, that the various aspects of essence are blocked by certain psychological issues. And according to the theory of wholes, which is really more than a theory because all of us in the school have experienced it in action many times, but the basic idea is that when an aspect of essence, which is part of who you truly are, such as compassion or love or value as an aspect of essence, value meaning a sense of feeling good about yourself, if that's blocked, you at some level will feel a hole. You will feel a sense of deficiency. So in the example that I was just giving, there's a sense of hurt and a sense of feeling unlovable, which is partly because maybe you weren't loved enough or nurtured enough as a child, but also it's because as a result of not being loved or nurtured enough, you actually closed yourself off to your true spiritual nature, or to some aspect of your true spiritual nature, which might be a sense of value, or it might be, there's another one of the aspects of essence is called merging gold, which is a sense of it's a form of love, but it's a kind of a melting, connecting, merging, open sort of kind of love. And it gets associated with another person. So most of us end up feeling like I can only have that kind of merging if I'm usually with a lover. But it's actually an aspect of our own nature. We don't have to be with someone else to have that. It's part of us. It's part of our spiritual essence. So, but if that part is blocked, then there will be an underlying sense of deficiency. So according to the theory of wholes, if you, in your exploring yourself, in doing inquiry, if you become aware of, let's say in this case, that sense of hurt and then the sense of I'm unlovable because of that object relation, if you really go into that experience and really understand it, not just intellectually, but experientially, and often it requires understanding where it came from in your childhood. So it may involve actually experiencing a sense of deprivation as a child or whatever. But if you really allow yourself to go into that with some understanding and also with presence, this is a really interesting thing. It's a matter of, you want to be able to feel the pain of the hurt and the sense of being unlovable, but you also want to be present with it. You can feel pain, you can feel emotions without really being present with them. So it's a matter of feeling it and being present with it and not being totally identified with it. That the other thing that's needed for the theory of wholes to really operate is that you need to, while at the same time you're feeling this sense of deficiency, this sense of not being lovable, you also, at some level, you recognize that this is an object relation. This is not simply the truth about me. This is not simply who I am. In fact, who I am is really something else. But this is what it feels like who I am right now. So there has to be some sense of disidentification. Anyway, what happens often, if you really can go into something fully and understand it with a sense of presence and disidentification, what happens is that seemingly miraculously, some aspect of essence emerges in your experience. So you may suddenly start feeling a sense of value, or a sense of love, or a sense of merging, this merging gold. Or you might even feel a sense of support. You never know what's going to emerge. You don't even know for sure if something's going to emerge. You just have to be open to the process. But if you really can stay with it in this way, very often what happens is that there's a kind of transformation in your experience in that moment. And instead of feeling horrible and deficient and unlovable, you feel something very, very different. And it emerges kind of naturally from within you, not because, anybody gave anything to you or you figured out anything, but just because it emerges. Yes?
So is the theory of holes the actual deprivation that you're talking about, or is it the process of inquiry, recognizing the deprivation and the essence of becoming so?
Yeah, the theory of holes is that kind of describes the whole process. Yeah. And it's not, and this is just one example, it doesn't have to be about deprivation and being unlovable. It could be about feeling weak, or it could be about, there's lots of different, it usually involves a sense of deficiency, but it doesn't have to be this kind of deficiency. This is just one example. Yeah.
So the word holes, I think there's something being missing.
Right.
Inside the donor or something, so that's what is that what you're looking for?
Well, what's missing is the aspect of essence. See, that's why the hole is there, because you're blocked. You're not in touch, at least in that moment, with whatever that aspect is, whether it's value or merging or love or support or whatever it might be. It's also called that because it feels like going into a hole. When you go into that sense of pain and deficiency, it often feels like you're going down in a black hole. So it takes a lot of support, internal and sometimes external support, to be able to do that. One of the things I should say is that inquiry is done in a number of different forms. Sometimes it's done by yourself, but at the beginning it's usually not. At the beginning it's usually done, it's facilitated by a teacher. So people do individual sessions with teachers where they actually do inquiry, and the teacher is there and facilitates their exploration. Almost like psychotherapy, except it's not aimed at, doesn't have the same goals or aims as psychotherapy. And then inquiry is also sometimes done when there are large group meetings. There will often be talks, and then we'll often do exercises where they gather in groups of 3, and each person will have 15 minutes to do an inquiry with the other 2 people just witnessing. So it's often done in that form. And then there's small groups where people do inquiry, again facilitated by a teacher. So, and especially in the early stages of the work, and especially when you're going into something painful like this, you really need facilitation, especially at first. When you've been doing it for many years, then maybe you can go through something like that on your own, but certainly not at first. Did I see some other hands? Yeah.
This breakthrough where the essence comes into your inquiry and begins to somehow, maybe say you're flooded with one of the essential characteristics. Would you say that it's that the study of the individual psyche that constitutes your own experience, your own self, is some aspect that was troublesome is let go, or is
well, in that moment it's let go. It doesn't mean that it's let go permanently.
Right, but somehow the understanding and compassion is larger than that and contains it. I'm just trying to get
Well, in order for the theory of wholes to work, in order for the process to work, there does need to be a level of understanding, and actually compassion is very helpful in this process. Even if that's not the aspect that's going to emerge ultimately, compassion is a very important aspect of helping the whole thing to actually move ahead. If you don't have much compassion, it's very hard to go into pain like that, if you don't have much compassion for yourself. So all of those things support the process. But the actual shift happens through the aspect of essence emerging into experience. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just experiencing, getting a feel for it. In my mind, it seems to me that suddenly the vastness of compassion, the vastness of joy and peace overwhelm the intricate psychological trouble that you were having. And suddenly, you're at a place of peace with being somewhat imperfect.
It's not quite like that. That could happen, but it's not so much, here's this problem, but I'm really larger than that. That is part of it. But it's more that the aspect of essence that emerges is actually, in some sense, a response to that feeling of deficiency. It actually is the real you that that was blocked by the issue that you're dealing with. The way I understand it, this sounds mysterious, but the way I understand it is pretty simple, is that the reason you're not experiencing that aspect of essence to begin with is because it's blocked by this whole issue. So if you allow yourself to go into the issue in this way, it dissolves the blocks. And so what's naturally there is able to emerge. So that if you understand it that way, it doesn't sound quite so mysterious and strange. Clint, yeah.
So if I understand, the outcome of the process on a long-term basis would be just to keep revisiting this erroneous object relationship that someone might have set up that blocks him from the essence, that over a period of this practice, every time you visit it, it diminishes to the point where it's gone, and then you have direct access to that essence. Mm-hmm. Is that pretty accurate?
That's pretty accurate. I would just add one thing to it, and that is that usually it's not just a matter of repeating the same thing many times. It's usually that each time you revisit it, something new emerges. You learn more. There's a fuller understanding, experiential understanding of the issue. So it's not so much like you have to repeat it many times as that it has to keep happening to kind of deepen the understanding of whatever, and therefore the dissolving of that block.
Because it has a spiritual aspect to it, I wonder if issues such as karma come into it, in the sense that maybe blocks or the issues that we're struggling with don't just deal with childhood trauma, but actually deal with karmic tendencies that happen before our present time.
That could be. That's not part of the diamond approach. It doesn't deal with anything from past lives.
So basically, the root of this is it goes back to the child.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much of it sounds like the process is more around the emotional, attention to the emotional process as well as the energetic process in the body? Is there any focus on the story? This happened when I was 6, 7 years old. Well, here's the story, or this happened in my last relationship.
Yeah, there is. That can also be part of the inquiry. Sometimes that's necessary to really understand the story in order to have the full understanding, in order to allow the defense or the object relation to dissolve. So yeah, that's often part of it, especially the childhood origins of it.
I would think that would be a tricky process for the facilitator, because sometimes the story can really be a defense against being in the present experience.
Yep. That's why we get a lot of training in really being present and not just intellectualizing stories. Yeah.
Just to tag along with that, time is a factor here too, because stories evolve in bits and pieces over time, and I've been lucky enough to be sitting a counselor for over a year, uses these principles, and so everything's been able to emerge on a very slow progression, and we haven't been under pressure to accomplish things in a short period of time. So I think time is a factor here, where the trust in the process and the results of the process and the story all have to kind of emerge at a slow pace, I think, at deep deepens the experience too. My experience with it is giving time important.
I want to say the other thing I want to give it. This is only part of what inquiry is about. I think I'm going to. If I leave you only with this, you're going to think of this as just a sort of interesting form of psychotherapy, and it's really much more than that. Because sometimes inquiry doesn't involve going into a hole or dealing with defense or pain. Sometimes you, in doing your inquiry, you'll just naturally be in touch with some aspect of essence. And then what the inquiry is about is being curious about that and exploring that in order to allow that to unfold. So let me give an example of that, or something like that will illustrate a sort of different way that inquiry can go. Here we go. This is something that actually, this is a kind of a rough description of something that happened to me in a retreat a few months ago. I was kind of exploring myself, and I realized that one of the things, by the way, that you pay attention to in addition to body experiences and emotions and object relations is also, you might say, your process itself, and you kind of get more and more sophisticated in your ability to notice aspects of your process. And one of the things about inquiry is that it is ideally the attitude with which you do inquiry is that you are curious, you're interested to understand your process, but you have no goal. You're not trying to get anywhere, you're not trying to resolve psychological issues, you're not trying to get rid of pain, you're not trying to achieve essential states, you're not trying to get enlightened, you're just interested in actually being present in each moment in your experience and understanding it. That's the ideal attitude. Now, of course, most of us don't start out doing inquiry with that attitude. If we did, we'd be many years, into the work already. Anyway, what I noticed in this particular day, which is something I'd noticed many times over, is that my process that day involved trying. I wasn't simply just interested in my moment-to-moment experience. I was hoping to have some great spiritual opening, and that was actually affecting my experience in the moment, because I wasn't being fully present with whatever was there. I was kind of half noticing what was there and half thinking about, well, I wonder if this is going to lead to something, and I hope, and this whole other process was going on, which is kind of called efforting in the work, and I'm very familiar with that, but I noticed it again that day, and probably at a subtler level than I had noticed it before. And as a result and I noticed how it was actually getting in my way. I didn't just notice that I was everything, I actually noticed that it prevented me from being present as fully as I could be. And so I got interested in that, and as a result, the efforting kind of dissolved. And I noticed that I was really being very present with each experience that happened in each moment. And that I was very interested in, at each moment, some new experience would arise, a new thought or a new feeling or some other essential state would arise. And I noticed that not only was I interested in what arose, but I was just, I realized that I was kind of enjoying this sort of creative thing that was just emerging in each moment. Without my doing anything it was just happening. And I actually realized that I was loving that. It wasn't so much that I was loving the things that were happening. I was loving this sort of emergent process, that was happening because I wasn't trying to make anything happen. And so that was one of the aspects of essence that emerged, was this sense of love. for this ongoing process. And as I paid more attention to that, the feeling shifted into a sense of joy. That there was this sense of incredible joy at being able to participate in this process, and that this was the nature of reality. That if one could just allow one's process to unfold, it would be so loving and joyful. And then as I stayed with that, there was a sense of gratitude, which is another aspect of essence, which I was also feeling in my heart. The sense of joy was kind of more an upward feeling of more like partly head and partly heart, and there was a sense of almost like a light shining down on me as I was feeling the joy. So I'm just telling you this this is an example of another way that inquiry can unfold by paying attention and being curious about each of these experiences, and it kind of unfolded in that way. And so that's another way that inquiry can go. And another thing that can happen is you can have an opening like, in this particular case it didn't happen to me, but you can have an opening like that into some really wonderful essential state. And you stay with that for a few minutes, and then some block will come in. Because some part of you can't tolerate that state, or it triggers some... Actually, the essential states can actually often trigger psychological issues. You don't have to work through the issue necessarily first to get to the state. Sometimes you get to the state first, and then the state, by the very pressure of it, brings up the issue that has been, more or less keeping you from having access to that state in a more natural way. And so the issue can come in, and then you may work on the block or the issue that arises, and then that may lead to something else. So so the inquiry, anyway, but by just following this process, there's sort of a natural unfolding of working through defenses, going into pain, having states arise, having blocks arise, or sometimes just a continued unfolding of essential states. Yeah?
I'm curious, Buddhism, they have the 6 realms, and sometimes these openings into the kind of a God realm, the Deva realm, they call it, this the blissful light, and everything's open. And the trouble is that, like you say, these trigger these other states, and you fall into the realm of the jealous gods, trying to get back to that realm. And they ride in the realm, on the brakes, because it's not nice, it's not very good. So I'm curious how this practice relates to non-duality and actually waking up from attachment to higher states, attachment to lower states, and becomes free from yearnings of anything. Or does it, or is that its goal?
Yeah, no, that's definitely an understanding that attachment is definitely something that's part of the understanding. Well, the way you kind of asked 2 questions. Let me respond to the attachment issue first. The way that comes in is what I just in terms of what I just said about the attitude with which you do the inquiry. See, the ideal attitude for the inquiry is love of the truth. Is just love of the truth of each moment or whatever emerges. And that is, by definition, a state of non-attachment, because you're not attached to any particular experience, either holding on to it or getting it. You are interested in simply the truth of each moment. And so, and of course most of us don't operate that way, but when we're not, it's because of the we understand partly because we understand what inquiry is supposed to be, and also because by really paying attention to your experience, you actually get to see how the attachment, in this case trying was a form of attachment for me, efforting, how that actually gets in the way of being present. So that's definitely part of the understanding. And there also, there's a whole understanding that Hameed has. It's about what he calls the boundless dimensions, which are basically divine love, pure presence, non-conceptual reality, and what he calls the absolute, which is kind of like the void or the unmanifest. And these go beyond my essence. This is like the essence of everything. These are all different dimensions of true nature, which is boundless and which is non-dual. And so these are definitely part of the approach. And these are definitely states that will emerge. And one of the things that helps them to emerge at times is you may recognize the blocks that we work with are not all psychological blocks. Some of them are spiritual blocks. So you may recognize that I'm actually taking myself to be a person, a separate person. And you may actually be able to experience that as a block. People actually will experience a certain kind of boundary that they're creating around themselves to keep themselves as a separate person by certain subtle tensions in the body. And when you recognize that, that will tend to dissolve, and your experience will move in a more boundless direction. So that's also a big part of the work. So I can see I'm almost out of time, so we won't do exercises, but if there's more questions, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Do you have any experience with physical blocks, too? Because I've been working with this diaphragmatic blockage. It has a physical manifestation of blocking the energy and being a barrier, and that's a focus that has been very beneficial to me, but it's kind of nebulous.
Yeah, I'm glad you
can't reach in.
Right. I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, there's a whole in the work. There's a whole understanding of not only the psychological blocks and how they relate to all the spiritual states of essence, but also physical blocks. And there's a form of Reiki and body work, which is actually used by the teachers, doing deep breathing and so on, to also help work with the physical blocks. Yeah.
From my reading, as well as some of what you're saying, it sounds like, in terms of spiritual traditions, that it's grounded or connected to Buddhism and Sufism, those two traditions. And I know that Almaas uses Sufi stories as well from, what's his name, Idris Shah. You could talk a little bit about whether he consciously brings in other traditions or any traditions, or...
Yeah, they're kind of, as I say, the path itself evolved out of his own, actually with a friend, the two of them, their own spiritual exploration together. And certainly he had studied various other traditions before that. And he certainly is very knowledgeable about various traditions and kind of brings them in from here and there. But it's, so it is related to, and especially to Buddhism and Sufism. You're certainly right about that. And he or the other teachers will sometimes bring in those connections to the other traditions.
So do they suggest practices such as Vipassana or any other practices as part of the...
Yeah, well, some of the practices that we do are taken from other traditions. There's 2 or 3 different, probably 4 or 5 different meditation practices that people do at various points in their development. The first one is basically just a concentration practice, a concentration on the belly center. And then there's an awareness practice, meditation practice that we also do, which is somewhat similar to Vipassana. And then we also do a practice during the day. It's supposed to be done as much as possible, which comes from Gurdjieff, which is that's also a big influence, is Gurdjieff. So that's sensing the arms and legs and being aware of looking and listening during the just ordinary life practice. Let me see what else I should tell you. Hameed has written about 10 or 11 books under the name of A.H. Almaas, which are very interesting. But the best, if you're interested in learning more about this by reading, the best introductory book is written by one of the Diamond teachers. It's called The Diamond Approach by John Davis. And I brought a copy if anybody wants to check it out. This is the best place to start, I think, to learn more about it. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm asking one question. This sounds very similar to the Sufi, the Buddhist, and psychological work. It's definitely an amalgam. Does he have any way in which he distinguishes through quarrel with another? Does he say this is not? Or is he of the view that everyone is working this material with maybe a more efficacious way of approaching?
Yeah, no, I don't think he has any disagreements with other schools.
He would see saints emerging in all traditions.
Yeah. And he's even described, like, we did a number of retreats that all had to do with the absolute, and at one point he said, well, that retreat was really like approaching it like a Christian would, and that retreat was like a Sufi, and that retreat was like, Advaita Vedanta, and, he kind of like compared what he was doing to various other traditions. So he doesn't really have disagreements. It's more like he just sees that this is just another path, that's emerged sort of in the modern West and is therefore incorporated psychology. Okay. So, let's see. Oh, I have, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to the center to bring any literature, but I do have a phone number and a website if people want to check it out that way. And I also have some brochures on the things that I do, if anybody's interested. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jane, for the wisdom. I just want to end by seeing if there's any announcements, and also you planted a lot of seeds for me, so that was really great. That's called the seeds. The seeds begin abstract as their species, remote as the name on the sack. They are carried home in Fayette Seed Company, corner of vine and rose. But the sower going forth to sow sets foot into time to come, the seeds falling in his own place. He has prepared a way for his life to come to him, if it will. Like a tree, he has given roots to the earth and then stands free. Many blessings in the new life to come, and we'll meet again after the solstice. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.